Welcome back to Security Explained channel. In the previous videos, we discussed what assets are and how attackers discover them. Today we're going to talk about partial asset compromise, how attackers exploit it. Security is often explained in extremes. Either a system is secure or it is breached. Either an asset is safe or it is compromised. Reality doesn't work that way. Real-world security failures usually happen in small, quiet steps, not dramatic collapses. This series is about understanding those steps and how attackers actually take advantage of them. One of the most misunderstood ideas in security is partial asset compromise. Partial compromise means that an attacker does not fully control an asset, but controls enough of it to gain value, leverage, or momentum. And in practice, partial compromise is often all an attacker needs. A common mental model of compromise looks like a switch, off or on. Either the attacker has access or they don't. That model is dangerously incomplete. Assets are complex. They have interfaces, permissions, data flows, users, and dependencies. Attackers don't need all of that. They only need a useful part. Partial asset compromise happens when an attacker gains limited access, limited control, or limited visibility into an asset. But that limitation still creates meaningful risk. Let's make this concrete. Imagine a database. A full compromise might mean read and write access to all records. A partial compromise might mean read-only access to a subset of data. That still exposes sensitive information. That still enables profiling, fraud, or further attacks. From an attacker's perspective, that's success. Or consider an application server. An attacker might not gain administrative control, but they might gain the ability to execute a single function, read logs, or trigger internal requests. That partial access can reveal secrets, credentials, or internal structure. Another example is identity. An attacker may not compromise a privileged administrator account, but they compromise a low-privilege user account. On its own, that account might seem harmless, but it provides legitimacy, persistence, and a foothold inside the system. Partial compromise often becomes the starting point, not the end. This is why attackers value partial access so highly. Partial compromise reduces uncertainty. It turns assumptions into observations. Once inside, even in a limited way, attackers can enumerate internal assets, observe behavior, and test boundaries more often without triggering alarms. Defenders frequently underestimate partial compromise because the asset still mostly works. The service is still online. Data still appears intact. Users are still able to log in. But security damage is not always visible. One of the most dangerous forms of partial compromise is data exposure without modification. If attackers can read sensitive data but not change it, integrity and availability appear unaffected. Yet, confidentiality is gone. And confidentiality loss is often irreversible. Another common form is control without visibility. Attackers may influence how an asset behaves without being able to see its internal state. For example, triggering actions, sending messages, or shaping inputs. This can be used to manipulate outcomes, cause indirect harm, or exploit downstream systems. Partial compromise also appears in time-limited access. Attackers may only have access briefly, but during that window, they collect enough information to return later with greater precision. Short access does not mean low impact. There is also functional compromise. An attacker may not control the entire asset, but they control a critical function. For example, the ability to reset passwords, upload files, or invoke background jobs. That single function can be more powerful than broad but shallow access. Attackers think in terms of leverage, not completeness. They ask, what can I do with this access? What assumptions does the system make? What trust relationships does this unlock? Partial compromise is especially dangerous in complex systems because of implicit trust. Systems often assume that limited access is safe. They assume internal users are benign. They assume partial permissions won't be abused. Attackers exploit those assumptions. They chain partial compromises together. One limited account leads to another. One exposed interface reveals another dependency. One readable configuration file leads to credential reuse elsewhere. No single step looks catastrophic, but the sequence is. This is why many post-incident reports say things like, the attacker only had limited access at first. That only is doing a lot of work. From a defensive perspective, this changes how we think about protection. Security controls cannot focus only on preventing total compromise. They must limit the impact of partial compromise. This is where principles like least privilege, segmentation, and defense in depth actually matter. If partial compromise is inevitable, then systems must be designed to contain it. Monitoring also plays a crucial role. Partial compromise often produces subtle signals, unexpected access patterns, unusual sequences, or activity that is technically allowed but contextually strange. Ignoring those signals allows attackers to stay and expand. Ultimately, partial asset compromise reminds us of an uncomfortable truth. Attackers don't need perfect access, they need sufficient access. And defenders don't lose only when everything fails, they lose when small failures accumulate unnoticed. Security is not about preventing every possible breach, it's about understanding how damage happens incrementally, and partial compromise is one of the most common ways it begins.